Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be the one posting here, but life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs. So here it goes. My name's Lisa, and I've been married to my husband Michael for 12 years. We have a beautiful 8-year-old son named Tommy. From the outside, we had what seemed like a perfect life, a spacious apartment in the heart of New York City, a stable marriage, and a kid who's the light of our lives. But if I'm being honest, there were always cracks in the foundation. Michael was never the most attentive husband. He was charming, sure, but also distant, especially in the last few years. His job as a corporate lawyer kept him busy, or at least that's what he always said. I'd notice him working late, taking business trips more frequently, and he'd become more protective over his phone. He wasn't the Michael I fell in love with. Then came the big change. One day, completely out of the blue, Michael suggested we rent a small house on the shore of Lake Champlain for the summer. He said it would be good for us to get out of the city, let Tommy experience the outdoors, and allow us to reconnect. It sounded like a nice idea, but the timing was odd, considering how much he used to hate the idea of leaving the city for any extended period. Michael insisted that he needed to stay in New York for work, but he promised to visit us every weekend. I tried to convince myself that maybe this was the break we needed, a way to strengthen our family. So, I packed up Tommy and moved us to the lakeside house, while Michael stayed behind in the city. Looking back, I should have seen the writing on the wall. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? The first few weeks at the lake house were peaceful, almost idyllic. Tommy loved being by the water, and I started to think that maybe this was a good idea after all. But as the days turned into weeks, Michael's visits became less frequent. At first, he would come up every weekend as promised, but then it became every other weekend, and eventually he just stopped coming altogether. When I would call him, he'd always have some excuse, a big case at work, a last-minute meeting, or feeling too exhausted to make the trip. He'd reassure me with his smooth voice, always so convincing, and I'd try to push down the nagging feeling in my gut. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, while Tommy was playing outside, I decided to do something I had never done before. I checked Michael's emails. I hated myself for it, but curiosity and fear got the better of me. I logged into his account using a password I had known for years. It didn't take long for me to find what I was looking for, although I wish I hadn't. There were dozens of emails between Michael and a woman named Jessica. They were all the things you'd expect: flirty messages, plans for weekend getaways, inside jokes. I felt my stomach drop when I saw photos of the two of them in Paris, Rome, and Santorini, places we had once talked about visiting together. Michael wasn't just cheating, he had created an entirely new life with this woman, a life that didn't include me or our son. But the biggest shock came when I found an email exchange between Michael and a realtor. He had sold our New York apartment, the one I thought we were still living in, the place where Tommy took his first steps, where we celebrated birthdays and holidays, was gone. He had sold it behind my back and used the money to fund his European escapades with Jessica. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. My husband had not only betrayed me, but he had also stripped away the life I thought we had. I felt sick, angry, and completely lost. How could he do this to us? To Tommy? The life we had built together had just vanished in a series of clicks and emails. The man I thought I knew was a stranger. And that's when the rage started to set in. I spent the next few days in a haze, barely able to function. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and I avoided Michael's calls entirely. I wasn't ready to face him, not until I figured out how to confront him without falling apart. But eventually, I couldn't hold off any longer. I had to confront him. It was a Thursday evening when I finally mustered the courage. Tommy was asleep, and I was sitting on the porch, staring out at the dark water, my phone clutched in my hand. I dialed Michael's number, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the ringing. He answered on the third ring, sounding chipper as ever. "Hey Lisa, it's so great to hear your voice. How are you and Tommy holding up?" For a second I couldn't speak. How was I supposed to respond to that? I took a deep breath and went straight to the point. Michael, I know about Jessica, and I know about the apartment. There was a long, painful silence on the other end. I imagined him scrambling to come up with an excuse, some smooth lie to cover his tracks, but nothing came. Finally, he spoke, his voice much less confident than before. Lisa, I can explain. It's not what you think. Not what I think. I almost screamed into the phone, my voice shaking with anger. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. You sold our home, Michael. You sold our home, Michael. You sold our life without even telling me, and you're telling me it's not what I think. Lisa, please just listen. I never meant for this to happen. Jessica was. She was just someone I met through work. Things got complicated. I didn't want to hurt you, or Tommy. Then why did you? I demanded, tears streaming down my face now. Why did you destroy everything we had? Why did you leave us here while you ran off to Europe with her? He sighed heavily, and for a moment I thought I heard genuine regret in his voice. I don't know, Lisa. I guess I felt trapped. Our life in New York, it wasn't what I wanted anymore. I needed something new, something different. Jessica was just easy. I was stunned. After all this, that's all he had to say? That our marriage, our family was just too hard for him? That he needed something easier? My anger flared up again, hotter than before. You're a coward, Michael. You didn't just break our marriage, you broke our family. You betrayed me and abandoned your son. How could you be so selfish? He tried to interrupt, but I was on a roll now. And don't you dare think for a second that I'll just roll over and let you keep living this fantasy life. You're going to answer for this, Michael. You're going to face what you've done, and you're going to pay for it. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, painful bursts. I had confronted him, and it was worse than I ever imagined. There was no going back now. The man I once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who cared more about his own happiness than the family we had built together. But there was a small part of me that felt relieved. The truth was out in the open now. There were no more secrets, no more lies. It was time to figure out what to do next. After I hung up, I sat there on the porch, staring out at the dark expanse of the lake. The anger that had fueled me during the confrontation started to drain away, leaving behind a deep, aching sadness. It was like a black hole had opened up inside me, swallowing everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I had trusted for so long. I felt utterly lost. How had things gotten to this point? How had I missed all the signs? I replayed our last few years together over and over in my mind, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things went so horribly wrong. But the truth was, it wasn't just one moment. It was a slow, insidious erosion of trust, of love, until all that was left was the hollow shell of a marriage. The next few days were the hardest of my life. I had to keep it together for Tommy's sake, but every time I looked at him, my heart broke a little more. How was I going to explain this to him? How could I tell my sweet boy that his father had chosen another woman, another life, over us? The thought made me physically sick. I tried to distract myself with mundane tasks, cleaning the house, cooking meals, playing with Tommy, but nothing could take my mind off the gaping wound that Michael had left behind. I started to withdraw, not just from friends and family, but from Tommy as well. It was like I was on autopilot, going through the motions of life without really living it. Tommy, bless his heart, tried his best to cheer me up. He would bring me little drawings he made, or tell me stories about the games he played outside. But even his innocent attempts at making me smile felt like a knife to the heart, reminding me of the life we once had, and the future we had lost. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying Michael's words over and over in my head. He felt trapped. Our life wasn't what he wanted anymore. How could I have been so blind? I started to question everything. Was it my fault? Did I drive him away? Was there something I could have done differently to make him stay? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that none of this was on me. Michael made his choices. He chose to lie, to betray, to walk away from our family. And while I could accept that our marriage was over, what I couldn't accept was the way he had gone about it, the deceit, the manipulation, the complete disregard for the life we had built together. Eventually, the sadness started to morph into something else: determination. I wasn't going to let Michael's betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. Yes, he had hurt me in the worst possible way, but I wasn't broken. Not completely. For the first time since I discovered the affair, I started to think about what I wanted, what I needed to do to move forward. I knew that staying in this limbo, wallowing in pain and regret, wasn't going to help anyone, least of all Tommy, who deserved better than a mother who was barely holding on. So I made a decision. It was time to take back control of my life, to protect what was left of my family, and to make sure that Michael's betrayal didn't destroy us completely. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, whether I would file for divorce, fight for custody, or even confront Jessica, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Michael get away with this. With my resolve hardening, I knew I couldn't stay paralyzed by the hurt and anger. I had to act, to reclaim my life from the mess Michael had left behind. The first step was getting legal advice. I needed to know where I stood, both in terms of our marriage and the sale of the apartment. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. I found a local attorney, a woman named Karen, who came highly recommended. She was tough, no nonsense, and exactly what I needed. I scheduled a consultation and poured my heart out to her, explaining everything: Michael's affair, the sale of the apartment, and how he had left me and Tommy in this lakeside house with no plan for the future. Karen was calm and methodical, which was a relief after the emotional whirlwind I'd been living in. She explained that while Michael had the legal right to sell the apartment since it was in his name alone, I had rights too, especially when it came to the assets from the sale and our son's welfare. She encouraged me to file for divorce and start the process of securing custody of Tommy, as well as my share of what we had built together. Hearing those words, divorce, custody, made everything feel so real, like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. But as painful as it was, I knew it was the right thing to do. There was no going back to what we had. That life was gone, and I had to protect myself and my son. After my meeting with Karen, I started to put things in motion. I filed for divorce and, at Karen's advice, had her immediately freeze the assets from the apartment sale so that Michael couldn't blow through them in his new life with Jessica. It was a small victory, but it felt good to finally be doing something, to be taking control instead of waiting for the next disaster to strike. When I told Michael that I had filed for divorce, his reaction was predictably selfish. He acted surprised, even hurt, as if he hadn't been the one to destroy our marriage in the first place. "Lisa, I never wanted it to come to this," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We can still work something out. We can be civil about this, for Tommy's sake." "For Tommy's sake," I snapped, unable to believe his audacity. "You mean the son you abandoned while you were off gallivanting around Europe with your mistress? Don't you dare pretend this is about him." He tried to smooth things over, to convince me to agree to some amicable arrangement that would undoubtedly benefit him more than me, but I was done playing his game. I told him flat out that I was fighting for full custody of Tommy and my share of the assets, and that I was prepared to go to war if I had to. The confrontation was a turning point for me. I realized that I wasn't just grieving the loss of my marriage anymore, I was fighting for my future and Tommy's too. The sadness was still there, of course, but it was tempered by a newfound strength, a determination to make sure that Michael's betrayal didn't destroy us any more than it already had. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started to look for work, determined to be financially independent. I reached out to friends and family, who rallied around me in ways I never expected. And most importantly, I made sure that Tommy was okay, that he felt loved and secure despite everything that was happening. It wasn't easy. Some days the weight of it all felt crushing, like I was barely holding it together. But then I'd look at Tommy, at his innocent smile, and the way he still looked at me like I was his whole world, and I knew I had to keep going. For him, if not for myself. Eventually, Michael returned to the States, expecting to walk back into our lives as if nothing had changed. But he was in for a rude awakening. The house he came back to wasn't the one he had left behind. Tommy was thriving, and I was stronger than I had ever been. He tried to manipulate me, to weasel his way back in, but I stood my ground. He couldn't hurt us anymore. In the end, Michael got what he deserved: a messy divorce, limited visitation with Tommy, and a life that wasn't nearly as perfect as he'd imagined with Jessica. As for me, I finally found peace, knowing that I had done everything in my power to protect my son and rebuild our lives. I won't lie and say it was easy, or that I didn't have moments of doubt and regret. But looking back now, I'm proud of the choices I made. I stood up for myself and for Tommy, and I refused to let Michael's betrayal define me. Life goes on, and so do we, and while I'll always carry the scars of what happened, I know now that I'm stronger than I ever realized, and that's something Michael can never take away from me.